And so today we have Todd Lankford with us. How do Scrum Masters rethink their role on a team to avoid extinction? In other words, let's not die. Todd, how you doing?
Yeah, what an introduction. Yeah, I'm doing great. So definitely glad to be here. I've been in the agile product lean space for 20 plus years. Really, it's been a great journey. I have seen it as of late, though, that things are a bit rocky, and they seem to be really rocky for Scrum Masters. So this talk is really just to try to get us to save the Scrum Master in a way, and try to get back to kind of where we started and maybe back to basics. So we'll talk a bit about that as we go through it. This actually came from one of my articles. I write quite a bit on Medium, and I'm sure we'll get you links to kind of where you can find other articles I've written. But yeah, if you want to read this offline, you can certainly read it if you prefer that too. So let me share my screen.
Whilst you're doing that, yes, quite often we have the question, will the speaker be sharing their support that they used? Will you be actually sharing the actual PowerPoint with us or whatever it is?
Sure. Yeah, I don't mind doing that. Yeah, I can
Okay.
share that. Yeah, I'll
And
share a PDF. Yeah.
great. So we'll actually share it with everybody through Meetup and through email. So don't worry about that, everybody. Just getting that question out of the way straight away. Todd, take it away.
Awesome. Okay, so let's dive right into it. I don't know if you've heard this. I've certainly heard it quite a bit. This is very familiar to me. I hear people, and a lot more lately than normal, just wondering, what does a Scrum Master do, and do we really need them? And oh, we're self-managing, right? Do we need a Scrum Master? And I think this kind of underscores the reason that we kind of need a reboot in the way that the Scrum Master role has kind of manifested itself up to this point. So the crisis really, I feel like the role is losing relevance. You can tell by the fact that layoffs are happening quite a bit with the role. You'll see that they are mislabeled often, as they're trying to change the name. You'll see delivery lead or delivery manager. They're trying to kind of fit it into some preconceived notion of what they do know. They're kind of missing that project management aspect of things, and so you'll see that labeling happen too. You'll see that a Scrum Master might have 5 or 6 teams. That's crazy. Like how can you really build a strong, capable self-managing team if you're spread across 5 of them, or even 2 sometimes if the teams really are in the beginning of their journey. So I feel like this is leading to this crisis we're talking about, and we're going to discuss how we got here, and more importantly, what do we do about it? I've got 4 steps that we're going to walk through. So why has this happened? I kind of mentioned this a little bit, but I think this happened even in the very beginning when Scrum was rolling out. Is nobody really knew what a Scrum Master was. Like, what is a Scrum Master role? And what they did know is, hey, we have project managers. Maybe that's what it is. And so I think over time, especially as Scrum has scaled and become so popular, we basically haven't backed down on that, and it's kind of gotten out of hand. I feel like most people are saying that that's a project management role, but many people in the Scrum space and Agile space, Agile coaches, they fight back against that. They're like, no, this is not a project manager. And so now they're like, okay, if it's not a project manager, what is it? And people still don't understand. And so it's lost its place, right? And some of this is because of the certification focus. So you've got project managers that may be filling the role, and maybe the only experience they have is to go get a certification. Maybe they've read the Scrum Guide. And so they don't have the experience being what makes a Scrum Master great. And all they have is book smarts in a way. And so that causes some of this. Also, they tend to, because they're coming in many cases from more of a management or a project management lens, they default to managing the teams instead of leading them and growing them and building their capability. I made this mistake when I first started Scrum Mastering a long time ago. I'll tell you a little bit about that in a minute. And then the last thing is, because they're just certified and they're very new to it, they don't have a lot of experience, they're going to lean on the only thing they have, which is a framework and a list of steps they need to follow. And they haven't really embedded what it means to be agile. So I think this is why it's happened, from my perspective. And so what I think we have to do is get back to craft. So we need to kind of return and really focus on putting the mastery part back in the Scrum Master kind of role. They need to be able to master the craft of being a Scrum Master and what that really means. So I mentioned that when I started doing it, I defaulted to, hey, I was a project manager before I became a Scrum Master. I was a software developer before that. So I just defaulted to what I knew, which was creating a plan, assigning tasks to team members. And I mean, let me tell you, I had an extreme backlash from my team when I did that. I was new to the team, and they're like, "What are you doing?" And I mean, I was pretty embarrassed because I thought I was doing the right thing. It's everything in my instinct said this is the right thing to do, but they were like, "We don't want you to do that." And so it seemed like every step I took, I was making the wrong step. And my instincts were all backwards. So what I did was I found a mentor. And I think this is what started my career as a Scrum Master and just in the agility space in the right direction in general early on. This mentor, she worked with me like for an entire year. And this wasn't like, hey, come to me with any questions. She likes every day met with me. It's like, okay, here's what we're going to practice today. And we walked through how to do it. And she was right there with me when I tried it. I mean, most days I went home stressed out because I felt like I was never going to learn this. But at some point it clicked. And being able to lean on her and what she taught me, it made all the difference. It catapulted my learning because I could rely on her experience to guide me. So mentorship is very key, I think, to reigniting the Scrum Master role. It was for me. And I think it would also be helpful to any Scrum Master today. So this gets us to my 4 steps. And these 4 steps are what I took away from that experience with my mentor. And it's some of the things that I really developed as I grew as a Scrum Master. And I feel like they were a strong foundation that have led me to where I am today. And so that's what I'm going to walk you guys through. It's why I wrote the article on this. It's why I'm having this talk today. You know, I think spreading the word about what was successful for me might help someone else. And that's why we're doing it. So at this point, if you have questions, make sure you're adding them to the chat. We'll definitely come back at the end and answer them, but I'm going to keep moving for now. So before I get into the 4 steps, though, one last thing. I have seen 9 kind of anti-patterns, if you will, that Scrum Masters tend to do. And you should just stop doing these, I guess. Maybe that's the first thing. Just stop doing these things if you're doing them. I did many of these myself. It's some of the lessons I learned. I'm not going to read all these, but protecting the team is pretty important. Most Scrum teams are operating within an overall ecosystem. that doesn't promote agility. And so there's a lot of external forces that are going to come to the team, and you got to protect them. So like deadlines being enforced on the team to motivate them, stuff like that. So you got to like learn to protect the team, right? Don't just say, okay, yeah, I got to force the deadline on the team. And that takes some courage, right? Don't dictate how the team behaves. So this is interesting because we're going to get to the first step actually you might think it goes against it, but it doesn't. But you want to let the team decide. It's just in the beginning, you may need to help them get there. And so we'll talk about that in a minute, but you want to let them decide. You want to get them to a point where they can decide, because sometimes they're not there yet. Not driving the team to output. Scrum has taken this kind of weird angle where it's very output focused. How do we shift that to be more outcome focused? How do we put the team back in touch with the user? So these are some, I'm not going to go through all these, but if you're doing these, you know, Scrum Masters are doing these, try to coach them away from those. All right. The first way, helping the teams learn to self-organize. So we want the team to self-manage, to self-organize around the work. The interesting thing is, if a team is new to Scrum or they're working in an organization that doesn't promote agility, it's going to be hard to self-organize because the team probably is used to being told what to do, not self-organizing. And so as a Scrum Master, a big thing that you can do is to help them learn to self-organize. And so you need to jump in and actively model the behavior. So it's kind of like if you've ever taken swim lessons, you got a swim coach. When you're first learning how, they're in the water with you. They're showing you the moves. You're on the wall kicking. You want to start swimming. You're not ready yet. You got to learn how. So you have the coach saying, I'm going to show you how, and I'm going to be right there with you and help you do it. And so this is the first stage. And then you go to, all right, we're going to do it together. You kind of learn the basics. You can get out and make the moves. I'm going to guide you. And then the last stage, you do it, right? Now, so you grow into self-organizing behavior, especially if you don't have it early on. Now, some of the things you can model, for instance, show the team how to decide on their own and how to make that decision and act safely. So how do they decide to move and improve something or make a decision on their own, but do it in a safe way? Work with them to learn how to do that if they don't know how to do it. If they don't know how to do it, they may not ever take a step that's risky, right? So you've got to kind of help ease them into that. Showing them how to collaborate. Some teams may just be a collection of individuals. They work alone, they work solo. They may have to learn how to collaborate, work with them through that process. When an obstacle comes up, teach the team how to break through that. Like, don't just say, oh, we've got an obstacle, let's pull some more work and start it up. Let's actually finish our work by breaking through the obstacle. So that's some of the things you could do, and just jump right in and show the team how to do those things if they haven't had experience doing it. Without a guide, teams might be able to figure this out on their own, but I think it really helps to have a guide. Just like for me, when I had my mentor, she helped me learn a lot quicker by jumping in and showing me exactly what to do. And then letting me do it, being there with me as I did it, but then getting out of the way and letting me take flight eventually. All right. Way 2, remove impediments. So this is not doing all the administrative work for the team. That's not what an impediment is. And a lot of times Scrum Masters are doing that these days. They're scheduling meetings, they're managing Jira or whatever feature tool you use. They're getting drinks and treats for the team, all kinds of administrative stuff, right? That's not what a Scrum Master is for. An impediment is more like, the work is stuck in some approval queue. Somebody has to approve the work and it's stuck there. The value has stopped. Maybe there's extra processes that don't add value. Decisions waiting on others to make, unrealistic expectations that are put on the team with timelines and deadlines, no space to improve, external pressure to start everything at once. This is some of what the team doesn't have a lot of control over that a Scrum Master can help remove. Now, you're going to have to learn to work with the organization to remove these things. And you may not even have the power, and you may need to ask for help. But if you can make this happen, you're going to keep work flowing, and you're going to have a more powerful team. So one example for me that I did around this was, just to kind of give you something real, this team I worked with, they had to deploy anything to a test environment. They had to have another team do it. And I'm like, you guys are always waiting on this other team because they're never available. They're like, well, that's just the way things are. They felt like they couldn't control it. They're like, somebody said that we had to do it that way. So what I did was I went and I worked with the other team, and we came up with a way to automate that so that it was a push button type of thing. They put all the controls in the automation, so they felt safe letting my team do it, and that solved the problem. So we broke the dependency on that other team. We were able to get work flowing. My team felt powerless to do it. I helped them do it. Way number 3. So not only should you remove an impediment if it's there, you should try to head them off at the pass. So I think this is a superpower that a Scrum Master should have, which is, number one, having eyes for waste, but not only being able to see waste when it's occurred, but know what causes it. For instance, I have learned that deadlines that are imposed on a team to motivate performance cause every one of these lean waste to happen. It's a root cause. When that happens, you're going to see all 11 of these eventually. And at some point, it might completely demoralize the team. So when I see this pop up, when I see deadlines being imposed, I jump on it right away. So as a Scrum Master, I would say, okay, they're setting a deadline. They're trying to motivate us to the deadline. Somebody in management's doing this, a stakeholder or someone. So what I would do is say, all right, team, carry on. For now, keep working. Don't worry about the deadline. I'm going to go talk to management. So I'll go talk to management. And I wouldn't go in there and say, hey, what in the world are you guys doing? I would try to understand first, like, why are you setting the deadline? And have the conversation, understand their perspectives, really listen to them, and see what they're afraid of and what they're driving towards. And then I would explain to them, well, do you realize the downstream impacts that typically causes? And it actually prolongs your value in the end. And so we'd have that conversation. And then I'd say to the management or whoever's setting the deadline, would you have a meeting with the team? And they usually say yes. And so I get the team and management together and we co-create a solution. We let both sides talk. We try to figure out a game plan. And by doing that and having them work together, not only do you get the deadline away, but you build trust. You build the relationship between the team and management. And that prevents future deadlines being set because now they have a relationship. And you're rebuilding trust is key to that. So that's an example of how you could head off a lot of downstream waste by fixing the root cause. Now, if you come into a situation, like you come into a team, you're a new Scrum Master, you probably don't know what the root causes are that lead to the problems. You just don't have enough experience yet. But the cool thing is, you're normally going to be in an environment that has all kinds of waste. So you can just analyze the waste that's there and try to map it back to root causes. And before long, you're going to start to see patterns. You're going to see, these wastes are always caused by these things, right? And so if you use your current dysfunctional environment to kind of find the patterns yourself, then that's going to help you be able to see with those lean eyes and be able to be proactive and be able to head off problems before they become a problem. And so that's how you can do it yourself. If you have a mentor, you can also lean on the mentor. Okay, last but not least, something a Scrum Master can really help with, and this is all about transparency, external transparency. How do we help those not on the team know what the team's up to, know when they need help, understand what they're learning, understand what they're working on now, next, and later? So I found these are 4 things that I've used in the past. There could be many others. These are somewhat helpful from my experience. Stop the line has had really interesting implications to getting people external to the team to come help the team out. Just radiating the fact that there is a problem and we've actually stopped, we stopped to fix it. People get curious and they come look around. At one point I had when people were all in the office, I would have a light in the team room. It's like a red circling light that would be turned on when there was a problem. And that would kind of attract people. You can find other mechanisms when you're remote to do this, but having some kind of radiation of information is really good. It reduces anxiety. It takes a black box and makes it white or more transparent into what's going on at the team level. It just helps everything go better. And this doesn't mean that a Scrum Master is creating this themselves. Don't mistake. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that a Scrum Master should embed. This should be a byproduct of the way the team works anyway, and then finding a way to make that externally viewable and kind of radiating to people outside the team is what a Scrum Master can help with. And helping the team learn how to create these things as they do the work, and how to use these for their benefit. So in closing, the role of the Scrum Master is really more critical than ever. It requires getting back to mastery of the craft, not just relying on a certificate. You got to focus on these 4 ways, in my opinion. These are the ways that I use to really make the role meaningful. I've helped other Scrum Masters to do these things as well, and I've seen it work with them. So I think getting a mentor, trusting in the pursuit of your craft, this is what's going to make your team unstoppable. If you can do these things, you're going to help them flow value. And this is how we're going to get back to the core of what makes a Scrum Master great. It makes it a force multiplier for teams. So thank you for your attention. I hope this inspires you to reignite your Scrum journey. And I'm going to leave it open now for questions.
Okay, thank you, Todd. We had a question right at the beginning on one of the
Okay.
first slides. Fortune asked the question, and it says, where is the role of the system in your analysis, Todd?
The role of the system. So the system itself would be where you're looking for the waste. Is that what you mean? Or are you talking about the system meaning the product? What do you mean by system?
Maybe Fortune can give us some additional thoughts on that.
May I speak, Marco?
Yeah, go ahead.
Absolutely. So, by the system, of course, I'm talking about the corporate system and the overall organizational way of working.
Yes.
No one comes in to do a bad job. No one comes in to not manage information or not remove the impediments of the team. In my experience, and yours may differ, I bow to your expertise, is that many Scrum Masters come in fully prepared to do all the things that you request us to do in your beautiful lecture. However, they find that the system makes them impossible to do, and they do not have access to the levers or the people who have the levers of the system. And I'm wondering what your thoughts about that are as a systems thinker.
Yeah. So this is kind of where I feel like if you try to work the system and you just keep hitting walls, you've got to ask for help. Now, in my case, the mentor I had was able to give me access to people that could make change happen. And so that finding a mentor can really help sometimes inside the organization, especially one that knows how to work around the system or how to ask the right person. And if you can find the right person to start making a small change to the system, it becomes proof that to yourself that you can change it and to others. And the next time you ask for a change to the system, you have a little more quote unquote power because you've proven that you've made a change to the system. You have more courage to do it again, and other people have seen you do it. And you can say, hey, I did this. If we did a little bit more, then we could have even more value. And so the smaller steps help. Don't try to bite off too big. But if you can make a small step, then that kind of builds momentum for another. In my experience, that's what I've seen. Have you been able to try anything like that, Fortune?
Yeah. Yes, Todd. I always, when I come into an organization at whatever level, Scrum Master, product owner, Agile coach, enterprise Agile coach, I always immediately make sure that everyone understands that I surrender any control, and that way I can have the most powerful position, which is influence. And I definitely take your advice to partner with the person who can help me the most at that moment and build the power of influence throughout the organization to work with the people who can change the system and also instruct them with systems thinking on how the organization is going to react to that in line with Larman's laws. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. And those 11 wastes, you can use those to illustrate, hey, we're doing this now and it's causing these wastes. And I think if we make this one tweak, it'll like improve the waste in this way. You can start to educate the organization on waste too. If you do that.
Okay, we have a lot of questions coming in, Todd. Since
Okay.
you threw up the slide with questions, let me go back even further because I missed out this one. It's also from Fortune. It was when you was talking about if we need Scrum Masters. So who, in your experience, is asking if we need Scrum Masters.
Management, and teams. So I've heard it from both directions, and I've seen it in action too. Like in the past, especially since the pandemic started, I've seen teams start to go back into kind of solo work, individuals working alone, team leads leading them and assigning work. And they've almost said Scrum Masters can't even be with the team while they're working. There's separate meetings happening. I mean, I see all that at the team level. I see that happening all the time these days. And because of that, they don't fit in anymore. And management's questioning, well, why do we need them? You know, if the team leads are running the team now, what's a Scrum Master there for? And a lot of that, they don't understand the role because they've never really learned the value and the things we talked about in this presentation is what a Scrum Master should be doing. And they haven't let them do that either. And it just hasn't materialized, right? So management they're like, team leads are running the team. What's a Scrum Master to do? That's what I've seen lately.
Resonates. Obviously, when we ask questions, if you have anything to add, please do add them in the chat. We have a question that came in at the end when you're asking for questions from Martin. Todd, what would you add about the change agent element? This is all good advice for Scrum Masters, but if they're not there in the first place, they can't apply it. We need to get the hirers to appreciate the Scrum Masters again. So the question is, what would you add about the change agent element?
I almost feel like the Scrum Masters don't have a voice today to be the change agent. They would need someone to advocate for them. And so we would need to find someone in the organization that got the joke about agility and what Scrum Masters are there for to really help the change, to get back to giving Scrum Masters a chance to do what we're talking about. If it's to that point, like if it's in a situation where, say, a lot of Scrum Masters have been laid off, I mean, you've got to have someone to kind of advocate, you know, maybe to listen to why did we just lay all these people off and understand kind of the misconception and try to work through those. I think you got to have somebody who has a little more influence than the Scrum Master, who understands what it means to be a great Scrum Master and what it means to truly be agile. And, you know, like the stuff we talked about in this presentation about seeing the system and trying to eradicate waste. And if the Scrum Master is not doing that, who's doing it? I think you got to have some real conversation with the people that have made that decision. If you're in that kind of dire situation, and try to figure out, well, okay, if it's not the Scrum Master, who's going to do it? Because it needs to be done. I mean, I'm sure there's lots of waste. There's very few organizations I've worked with that don't have just mountains and mountains and mountains of waste. So I think somebody's got to do it. If it's not the Scrum Master, if we want to call it something else, that's fine. But yeah, Scrum Masters their hands are a bit tied right now, I think. I don't know if I answered your question, Martin, but.
Looks good. Martin threw the thumbs up.
All right.
Bruce has another question. What thoughts do you have if IT management tells the Scrum Masters to take on a business analyst and product management work too, as there is question as to if a Scrum Master role is one of value?
I would almost go back to, and I have had that before, and I've seen that too, where okay, you gotta do work and you can do Scrum Master on the side or something like that, because they don't know, like, what are you doing all day kind of questions, right? What I've typically done there is kind of got back to, I keep coming back to the, how do we prove there's a problem that needs to be solved and that you should be the one to try to help solve it as a Scrum Master? Like, if you can make the case for, look at all this waste we need to remove, and if I'm doing BA work and project management work and all this other stuff that doesn't have to do with getting rid of this waste, who's going to do it? I would almost go back to, well, okay, I can do that, but who's going to be looking out for all this other stuff? I would have that conversation with management.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Okay. Carlos has some questions. Could you share specific examples of how you've successfully modeled self-organizing behavior in your teams?
Yeah, so that gets back to, it's almost, so you're not giving them a presentation on it. You're actually getting in there with them and solving the problem with them. And in some cases, so you may ask your team, so what do you want to do? What do you guys think we should do about this? And they all just stand there and don't say anything because they've never been allowed to do it before. So you're like, okay, well, here's what I would do, team. I would I would do whatever the problem is. I would do this, this, and this. What do you think about that? And maybe start the conversation, and maybe you start this kind of co-creation activity with them and get them thinking about solving the problem, and then talk about, well, how are we going to do this together? And just do it with them. So it's more about being present and rolling up your sleeves and helping them their first time in the water, right? They're clutching to the side because they don't want to drown, and you got to help them slowly learn to let go. And the only way you can do that is to really kind of be there with them and teach them the new movement pattern, the new behavior. And at some point they're going to be comfortable and they'll start doing it themselves. That's what I've done, at least. So is that specific enough, or did you need maybe more specificity?
Carlos, let us know if you wanted some more examples. He has another question, Carlos. How did you choose? No, sorry. Oops. Another question. What strategies do you recommend for effectively teaching self-organization to teams that are new to Scrum?
That are new to Scrum.
Hmm.
So, one interesting thing about self-organization is it's a lot easier when you're working as a team. And so usually most teams that have not done Scrum before are not used to the high degree of collaboration that's required. And there's power in numbers to learning anything new. And so the quicker you can get the team from working solo on individual tasks or even individual stories or whatever they're doing today to working together on one thing at a time and starting and finishing it together, learning from each other, that's going to ramp up learning in multiple angles, cross-functional spreading of knowledge, as well as gaining confidence as a team, working together, owning your work, getting it done, breaking through obstacles. And if you're right there with them as a Scrum Master, you can coach. You're in the water with them. So if you're a Scrum Master who only goes to the daily stand-up, and that's your only touch point with the team, you're never going to be able to do what I'm talking about. You got to be there with them as they're working. So when we all used to be in the office, I know a lot of us aren't still. I found that I was right there with the team in the mix, right? We're all sitting in the same room, talking all the time. I knew what was going on. It's a lot harder now that we're remote. You have to work harder at it, but you need to work with your team closely. I guess that's my biggest advice for building self-organization in a brand new team.
Okay, Todd, I think we've got at least 8 questions more.
Okay.
How did you choose your mentors throughout your career, and what qualities did you look for in them?
Mm.
So probably beyond the first mentor.
Yeah. So I look for someone who challenges me. I don't want someone to compliment me all the time that I'm doing a good job. I want someone to push me beyond my boundaries. And so I don't necessarily want them to be nice, if that makes sense. I want them to make me get outside of my comfort zone. That's what I look for in a coach, in any kind of a mentor. Um, the other thing is I want someone who's done this before a lot, right? I want an expert. I want somebody who knows what they're talking about, because if I can latch onto that, then I'm going to expedite my learning, my growth exponentially, because I got access to someone who has done this before many times in many different contexts, and that's invaluable when you're trying to learn something new. So I think both those things combined, like someone who really knows the craft, really experienced in it, and someone that's not nice and pushes me.
Somebody who's got no fluff. That was questions of Carlos. So Carlos, if you want to bounce on them, please do throw something into the chat and we'll get to it. Georgie has the next question. Of late, I see a shift of merge, or sorry, of late, I see a shift or merge of responsibility where engineering managers are the Scrum Masters of the team, giving them direct people management control authority on the Scrum team members. Who do you think this is happening? Why do you think this is happening? And how could we prevent this and keep Scrum Master as a servant leader?
I think this is happening because it's a control. People desire to get control over. They've always desired this on software and software products and software in general. Like, how do we get control of this black box of a beast that we have no idea what's going on and no idea when it's going to be done? They're always seeking control. And so now that a lot of teams are remote, they feel like the control is even less there. And so I feel like they're grasping at straws to try to gain back control. And they've missed the message that you can't control software product development. You have to embrace learning, not control. Like, how do we embrace learning? How do we pivot quick? How do we work small and think big and adjust as we have the evidence? They're missing that that's what we need to do. We don't need more management. We need more people that can think on the ground and solve problems on the terrain. And we don't need someone to tell the team what to do, because that doesn't control anything. That assumes you can control it. So it's almost an education thing, and it's a gut reaction to the current situation, I think. And so it requires the change agents among us to educate more and to prove more how a different model is better. I think proving is better than education. I think we'd have to run a small experiment to show that, actually managing the team is less effective than, giving the team ownership and letting them self-manage. We'd have to prove that. Did that help? That's my perspective.
Okay, Georgie, if you want to bounce on that, please do. Michael has a question. How much of this is more about questioning the value of Scrum or agility in general, rather than the value of the Scrum Master in particular?
I think it's all related for sure. And I think it goes back to the control issue again. People, I think, assumed that Agile was going to get them more, better, faster, cheaper, more output. It's like more output oriented. And when that didn't pan out, they're like, oh, we're ejecting Agile from the system. And that includes Scrum and everything else. They just weren't getting out of it what they desired. I have seen that a lot. Like people are like, well, this is not getting me any more control. But it wasn't ever meant to give more control. It was meant to embrace learning, right? And they had the wrong assumption about Agile. And so I do think that is related to everything we're seeing. This is a side effect of that whole backlash on the Agile movement, because it's not getting what they thought it was going to give them.
Mm.
And it wasn't
Interesting.
supposed to do that.
When you say that, it just sounds like that companies just like stayed in their ways of working, and all they did was add Scrum. And so, does that make sense? Instead of actually looking at Scrum as a different way to work within and to actually go through the change, they're just adding Scrum because it's all flashy and silver bullet and all this kind of thing. That's what's coming through my mind when you're saying that.
Yeah, and it's almost like, well, Scrum it's not really changing. We're still not meeting all the deadlines and delivering more output, and we're not doing all these things that we wanted, and we're having to do all these extra sprint events, and
and it's wasting time.
I think
we have
that's
another question. Carlos comes back for another question. How do you decide when to intervene and when to let the team to try and solve an impediment on their own? Okay. And what early warning signs do you look for in a project to anticipate problems before they become major blockers? So double question here.
Yeah,
how do you decide when to intervene?
Yeah, well, almost both sides of this question come back to getting in the reps of, like, you've got to really be doing this repetitively and keeping an eye out for waste and what's causing it. So kind of those 2 slides I had in the presentation about waste and the 5 whys and all that stuff, like you got to keep doing that, and eventually you're going to start seeing patterns. You will. I mean, it's funny. It's like, that's all I see now is patterns. I'm like, I know what that does. And so if you see the team, if you've been doing this long enough, and then let's say you join a new team and you're like, okay, I'm new to this team, and you can spot something before it becomes a problem, bring it up to the team and say, hey, I've seen this happen a lot of times, and when we do this, I see this normally happen, and do you guys think we should avoid that? And just see what they say. Hey, you can let them decide, but I think, how do you interject your knowledge into the equation? And it might make them think. Now, if they say, we're going to ignore you, and they go down the path and it happens, well, then you gain some credibility, because you tried to tell them it would be a problem. And yeah, you can let them, you're not going to come in and say, no, I'm not going to allow you to do that. You're like, okay, well, let's see what happens. I could be wrong, but and they may listen to you more next time you say something, if that happens. So I think it's a win-win, whether they take your advice or they don't.
You know what? The questions are building up. We've even got more questions that have been coming in the last 5 minutes. So we've only got 2 minutes left, Todd.
Okay.
Do you have any time after this session?
Yeah, I've got a little time. I can hang around.
So I can continue with the questions. I have about 5 minutes extra. So if that's okay with you, we can keep on going for another 7 or 8 minutes.
Let's go. Sure.
Let's go. Okay, we have another question. What is the pain versus control matrix by Todd Lankford? This is from Maru,
Pain versus control.
Matrix.
That was my last post thing. Yeah, so what I was talking about with that was if you have things that are blocking you, try to map those to how painful is it and how much control do you have over removing it. And that's going to tell you, okay, well, if I have control and it's high pain, then I should try to remove it, right? Because it's a no-brainer. If you don't have control and it's high pain, you should ask for help. And so I use that matrix to say, okay, it helps me gain some control over my situation and understand what I can control, what I can't, what's the most painful. I've got all these problems. Some of them are not as painful. Maybe I don't need to solve those. I don't need to ask for help. But the high pain problems, I can control some of them, or this could be me or my team or whoever. This is an individual thing or a team thing or an organizational thing. It helps you gain some control. And then incrementally, you can start removing those. Like, okay, I've got 5 high pain things I can control. What's the biggest pain point? I'm going to go try to remove that. And then, okay, what's the next one? What's the next one? And then, okay, these things I can't control, I can ask for help for one, get that fixed and go to the next one. So it's a way to kind of gain control over a lot of obstacles if you have a lot, just too many to handle.
Okay, that's great. Anthony, this is a long question. How do you handle a situation where multiple team members are constantly doing 2 things? First one, not paying attention on calls. When team members ask them questions, they don't respond, and we have to repeatedly ask them if they are there and then repeat the question. So they're not paying attention to calls. The second thing is team members are not tasking out their work. They're not creating subtasks in their stories, so we don't know what task they're working on. So those are the 2 things. How do you handle these situations where multiple team members are doing this?
I can tell you maybe a couple things I've done. I've experienced this on a few teams since people were remote more than before. And it's usually I'll come into a new team and I'll see this going on. So I will usually start with a team chartering activity. And in that chartering activity, I mean, there's all kinds of things to that, but it's about team building more or less. But one thing in there in particular is kind of a working agreement or kind of norms, if you will. And you have the team create all this stuff, right? Like, what are our norms? And the first few retrospectives after you create that, you might come back to it and say, okay, we said we're going to work this way. How's it working out? And, do we need to tweak it any? And things like that may come up. Like in the retro, somebody may say, well, when we're together in, some event, nobody's paying attention. And so then, okay, maybe that wasn't in our norm. Should we make a norm around that? And how do we self-govern that as a team? So I think bringing it to the team as a conversation topic is my first step. One other thing I have suggested, maybe this is part of a norm, would be if the team doesn't have their cameras on, turning them on actually, for some reason, you can't multitask as easy if you're on camera. So that's one thing I've seen some teams put in the norms is let's just keep our cameras on and make sure that we're engaged and not multitasking. And anyway, so those are some of the things I've done around that.
Okay, great. I'm actually counting the questions that we've got to get through. This is amazing. Kimberly, Agile Coach shared with me on his perspective on the value of Scrum Masters, these things: professional teams, people getting paid to play the game, hire trainers and head coaches. The professional players know how to play. They have amazing skills, but the players still need guidance on how to get stronger together. What plays will potentially win games? How can they effectively work together? And then the third thing, our teams are professional developers. Do they not need that same kind of guidance, how to effectively work together, get stronger together, and how to deliver value? That was a question, sorry. How to deliver value.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big part of a Scrum Master's role, is like figuring out how do we set a valuable goal as a team and work together collaboratively to get there. When I go into teams and everybody's got their own stories and their own tasks, and I mean, we had that question earlier too about like, I don't even know the tasks that people are working on. Well, if we're working together on one thing at a time as a team to get it finished, then I mean, everybody should know what's going on. Like we're basically working together all day long. You know, we might be have a few people go off and do some tasks, but we're quickly coming back together and integrating all that together and working together, and everybody's working on the same thing. I think that helps a lot. And it also elevates the game of the team, right? So like, it's not the sum of the part, it's greater than the sum of the parts. You only get that if you're working together. If everybody's working alone, you don't get that. Solo work is not a team. I don't know. Does that help? I feel like professional, like to really play like a professional team, you got to work together.
Yep. I don't know. I hope that actually answers the question, because there was a lot of professional words in there. Professional teams, developers, players, and it is all about actually being a team. So how to deliver value, get stronger together. So I think that goes back to your working agreements as well,
Oh yeah.
that you mentioned earlier.
Yep.
And so anyway, it's now 5 past the hour. I've actually got about 10 more questions, but I think we're going to have to actually cut that short. What I've done is I've taken a copy of all the questions. Okay, I put them to one side. Todd, how would you like to handle these questions after this session?
Why don't you send those to me and I'll answer them, and you can put them on the posting with this afterwards or whatever. You can send it back out to the group.
Okay, do you want me to add it as a comment on the meetup such that you can then take them?
Yeah, sure,
Yeah,
I'll do that. Yep.
I'll do that. Okay, that's great. And then basically you can reply to each of the comments, and basically that way people that are actually part of the meetup can easily go there and see the answers that you've got to give them. That's
Perfect.
great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely. I really enjoyed it, guys.
Oh, thank you, Todd. Thank you for coming. Thank you, audience. Thank you, the community. This was a wonderful meetup. Brilliant engagement. Lots of questions. I really enjoyed it. Thank you. Thank you, Todd. Thank you.